Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jason Fox. I'm the Senior Technical Evangelist at the FIWARE Foundation. And today we're running a FIWARE community webinar on open source licensing. So the title of today's webinar is Choosing Your Open Source Licenses for FIWARE Components. Let's see what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so we'll break this down to six parts, basically. Firstly, we need to discuss why do you need a license, and then explain what common open source licenses are available, how do you pick one, what are the advantages one particular license over another, what are the disadvantages, and I'll go into three examples in detail, being the MIT license, the Apache license, the AGPL 3.0 license. Now, these are all very, very common options which you may want to have depending on, again, what your needs are. Then there'll be a section on what the other bits you need to have into any GitHub repository. So how can you attract your users and contributors through ensuring that your README is sufficient? What are your obligations when you are using somebody else's open source software within your project? Why do you need a notices? What does it need to go in there? What sort of information do you need to put into the license? And are there any restrictions as to what you can and cannot do? Finally, we'll move on to handling contributions from outsiders and a short discussion on contributor license agreements and the concept of developer certificate of origin. For those of you, I'm sure everyone is familiar with FIWARE, but this is just a quick update. This is the current catalogue of the FIWARE components. You can see they are split into 4 or 5 areas, mainly core context management. If you haven't got context data, you haven't got a powered by FIWARE system. And then on top of that, you can have your visualization components, your dashboards, your processing, and what have you. And below that, you can have your connections to the real world, like your connections to IoT, your connections to robots, your connection to external third-party systems. Now, the whole of FIWARE is, or the FIWARE Catalog, is a collection of open source components. Therefore, you as a company would not be making money directly out of these layers here. What you would be doing is you'd be making money either above the top, where you've got your particular processing algorithm which is connecting to the system, or equally it could be your IoT device, your robot, which would actually connect in to the bottom in a plug-and-play fashion into a FIWARE system. But you can see a lot of common use case scenarios are covered by standard components. And obviously, if you're building up a system, you'd want to pick as many standard components as possible. So all of these are open source. So who am I to talk about open source? Well, if you have a look at the existing FIWARE catalog, you will see there are a large variety of licenses which are used by the various components. You can see that FIWARE itself will accept into the catalog any system that uses a recognized open source license, but it does not define which license you may use. So we have here approximately, I think it's about 6 or 7 different licenses, or variations of licenses which are doing. A lot of these are AGPL 3.0, which we'll go into more detail. Those are ones in orange. Now, some of them are Apache 2, again, that we'll go into detail. There are 2 items on here which are BDS 4 clause, fourth clause licenses. Now, the reason why those 2 happen to be BDS clause 4 is because the company in question, which would be NEC, who've contributed that license, will require internally that all of their open source software follows BSD 4 clause. Now, this means that first thing you want to do if you are open sourcing your software is you should go to your legal department and find out, do we have a choice? Are we in a position where we are able to change our software license, or do we actually follow a real standard software license. Again, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll find a couple of EUPL, European Union license agreements. These are components which have been created by the European Commission, for example. It's a license which is available in 22 different languages, all of which have got equal legal weight. And therefore, if you're building it under the European Commission, they will say, hey, you've got to put the extend this as EUPL. We'll describe what these things are doing behind. Now, myself, I am a software developer. I'm an open source software developer. I am not a lawyer. I happen to have a twin brother who is an intellectual property lawyer, but it is not my area. So what you must understand from this short presentation is that this is a developer's viewpoint on what your requirements are and what your needs are. Now, as part of my job, I have been discussing with the various contributors to ensure that they, when they have contributed to FIWARE, are legal. And the very first thing that we state in our FIWARE contributor requirements is that you must have a license. It must have a recognized open source license. Now, if you look at the GitHub terms and conditions, all that you are offering when you push software to GitHub is the right to fork and view the software. Without a license, you are effectively holding back anyone from using the software, and they are not supposed to be using it. So if you haven't got a license, you've not got open source software. You've got a bit of code which someone can look at. Therefore, picking your license is very, very important. Okay, so we've got two colors here. What do the colors mean? The various different licenses are degrees of permissivity. Either they permit or restrict the freedom that you, as a third party using my software, have as the ability to change, alter the code, reuse the code, claim it is mine. You can see there's a range here from the unlicensed license, which is actually a definition of falling into the public domain, across to the AGPL, which we'll go a bit later, which is much more restrictive. Now, if you have a piece of software and you put it into unlicensed, I can steal it, I can claim it's mine, I can basically do whatever I like with it. And you have said, I've got no problem with that whatsoever. Now, this is fine if you have, if you really want to push things to the public good. If you move on to something like the MIT license, which is where most of the FIWARE software tutorials, for example, are placed, that again, you can use it, you can modify it, you can claim it's yours. However, you are required to admit that the copyright of this particular piece of software, which I've used, which I can modify and blah blah blah, is originally from the FIWARE Foundation. Okay, so we're slowly getting slightly more restrictive. You've got to leave my copyrights alone. Then you move on to the Apache 2 license. Again, we'll get more detail there. Apache 2 has got a specific clause on patents, and then the BSD4 clause, keeping that the wrong way around, has got basically the same restrictions as Apache 2, but you also can't use my name in your advertising. If I have Jason Fox software and you use my lump of software, you can't say, and as authorized by Jason Fox. It's just not allowed. Then we move on to the ones in orange, which are not bad. It's just it's serving a different purpose. The whole point of the licenses in orange, EUPL or AGPL, in fact, most of the GNU licenses, is that they are copyleft licenses. Now, a copyleft license is a little bit different in that you can't go around mucking around with my license. If you use this license, you have to continue offering source code with that license thereafter. This makes a lot of sense for a large amount of the FIWARE catalog. If we go back to that for a second, if you go back to the FIWARE catalog, you can see we've got a load of standalone elements here. We've got things like Orion Context Broker, for example, is AGPL. And that is a piece of software which has been offered to the open source community, but we don't want a wide range of competing variants and flavors of the context broker available. You want to make sure that any code you put out there can get pushed back into the open source community. Therefore, you leave it as AGPL. It's usually stuff, as I stated beforehand, it's usually stuff which is a bit more commercial in nature. I mean, again, going back to the thing here, if you look at the companies behind the various elements in green, they are more likely to be, say, academic institutions like FIROS or Keyrock, which are using MIT, whereas the companies which tend to use things like EPL, EUPL, or AGPL have got additional commercial requirements. Now, you'll notice there is one weird license here, which is the one for WireCloud, which again is AGPL, but they have got a specific class path-like exception. Now, within the FIWARE community, if you go for an AGPL license, that's fine, but there will usually be a disclaimer on your README basically saying we're not going to sue you, and a closer definition of what a what means a change the code, and what means a link, and whether you are forced to make your stuff public open source. Now, similarly with WireCloud, the base license is a standard license. However, there is an additional opening to say, okay, but you can use this on a class path, and just to give you a little bit more safety, or give your lawyers a little bit more safety to say, yeah, this will be okay. In general, you don't want to go around changing your licenses at will, because most of us are developers. We're not legal people, and we need to ensure that the wording is sufficient to have some sort of legal meaning. There's a phrase in the open source community called crayon licenses. Now, this goes back to an old Monty Python sketch, where basically people write in their own terms using a crayon. And this is very bad as far as legal terms are concerned, because it's got no real meaning. It needs to have proper legal wording behind it in order to make any sense, and obviously give a third party the desire to use your software and think, yeah, I'm not going to have any problems here. Okay, so let's move on to some of the licenses in more detail. Start off with the MIT license. We're moving from the more permissive to the more restrictive. MIT license, short and simple permissive license with conditions requiring copyright and license notices. The important thing here is that I want to be recognized as the originator of this code. You can use it for private use. You can use it in your commercial software. I don't really care. But this is my code. I've written something here, and you're supposed to tell me what I'm doing. Now, the main restriction here, which is the restriction you'd have above the unlicensed, is that you must display the license and the copyright notice. If you are using a system which uses a package manager, for example, Node npm, you look inside your Node modules, you'll find that the license file itself is one of the things which is copied into the directory, and this is an indication of, yes, this was written by Jason Fox. I'm using it, and I'm using it as a third-party license. You beyond the license and the copyright, and it's a fairly short license, is about five lines long. There's nothing much which is to restriction. There's nothing really stopping someone coming in and using your license and then making their own software much more restrictive or making it totally commercial for use. It's very, very simple. But this is the whole point: is that it's a short and simple permissive license, and the whole point is to say, here's a lump of code, but I wrote it. Moving on, we look into the Apache license. The Apache license is very common, and it's kind of a halfway house. It's moderately permissive without being overly permissive, and it has a certain number of rather useful restrictions. So, for example, you are not liable if you write if you use my software and claim that it didn't work and it caused a problem. I'm not liable because I'm saying I have limited liability and no warranty. Take this code as necessary. However, you are free to modify this as you see fit, and you're free to distribute it. And once again, you need to put the license and copyright notices. Now, the 2 points at the bottom here are the main difference between the MIT license and the Apache license. Any changes you make to the code must be documented. If you modify my source code and add something nasty in it or something nice, you should mention where you're making that change. That way, people can decide whether they want to take your improved version or altered version or worse version, depending on how you see it, and the original. Finally, the thing which really pleases lawyers here is that if you, again, look at the legalese, look at the text, there is an explicit grant of patent rights. So if I have a widget which is using your software, which has now got this license on there, and it's a really clever widget, and I want to create a patent, some sort of intellectual property claim on my system using your software, then that is automatically fine. Now, we're all in the process of writing innovative software for unusual situations, and therefore it is much more useful for third parties if there is an explicit grant of patent rights within the source code. Sorry, within the license agreement, so that the code can be used. Let's move on to a more restrictive form of license. This is very common, the FIWARE General Public License for FIWARE components. However, it is very strong copy left. Copy left means that if you make modifications, and the word modifications here has got a very broad understanding depending on what you're talking about. If you make modifications, it must remain under AGPL 3.0. Now, question is, if you are just linking to a AGPL product, is that a modification, or is it distribution? If you are in a have a submodule which is under AGPL, does it need to be under AGPL? My personal take on this, and as I said, I'm not a lawyer, my personal take on this is that to be safe, if you are using AGPL elements, they should either be isolated, as in separate microservices, which is the case for the various FIWARE components. You know, your context broker is an isolated component, and therefore you're not modifying it. You're using it, but you're not modifying it. Or you have a situation like the ISU node library, where because I'm using that library, I'm better off offering my own custom IoT agent under AGPL. As an example, if you look at the FIWARE Catalog, the FIWARE Catalog is a collection of the various elements of the FIWARE community all in one GitHub repository. It's mainly used for navigation, so you can go off and find the right lump of code. It's got no real use. However, the license used on that umbrella catalog is AGPL, because various elements within it are AGPL. And indeed, if you use AGPL, you will need to make sure that you are following a lot more strict elements. So again, you can use it publicly, you can use it privately, and you've got limited liability and no warranty, same as MIT, same as Apache 2. But the point being is that your new version, and indeed I've done this with my own IoT agent, for example, must remain under AGPL, which is saying you need to offer the source code. Now, this is not you linking to this. This is you actually altering the actual code. There is more detail on opensource.com, providing the corresponding source code, what you need to provide. Again, the details will end up being what you have to look up. Okay. Traditionally, on a README, you should actually have details of the license, and the traditional place for your license text is at the bottom of the README. If you go to the IoT agent for ISO XML/adapt, it will say at the bottom of the README page that it is copyright FIWARE Foundation, and it will say what license it is. Now, this is one of the most important things with your software is, can I use it legally? And typically, if you want your software to be used, you want to follow the order which is shown on the screen. So you want to have the license is the very last element after your how to install it, how to use it, what the interfaces are, how it's tested, and so on. Now, there are various schools of thought on your README, and the main advice I would give is to follow a standardized README template. They're all pretty similar. My personal favourite is following the standard README because it covers an order, and it's surprising how much stuff which is on GitHub which doesn't even bother starting with a short summary of what the component does. What's the most important thing you need to do is to say, what is this all about? Second most important thing is, can I use it? Third point, as I said, get the right order, and you need to keep external links obvious. So rather than just keeping little images, it's more useful to have your blue texts, as you can see on the right-hand side, which are intuitively linked. You can see, oh, maybe this particular piece of software has got some documentation with it. Maybe this particular piece of software has got a Docker image with it. Maybe this particular piece of software has got additional information on the context. The license at the bottom, there are more files which come in later. Now, the other end of the file at the top is where you would normally place your badges. If you go back to the ones I was showing beforehand, that was your license badge, but there's probably others which are really useful. So you look at those badges there. What I'm trying to say from this is that not only am I a legal piece of software which you can use with confidence, but I'm easy to set up, I'm popular to use. Over 48,000 Docker images have been pulled. We have a community. We can you can use stuff like Stack Overflow, and people will answer your questions. And the second line there is saying I'm doing various things on quality. As you notice, there's actually a significant difference between the first row of those badges and the second row of those badges. The first row of those badges is telling you about the software itself, the software and the community itself, product information. The second row is actually saying, what is the quality of my build? Do I actually bother automating my documentation? Do I run CI? Do I bother with code coverage? Do I use external static linting tools? Am I following industry best practice? Now, on most of my repositories and repositories I contribute to, these little image badges are actually links, and you can click on them. However, it's not automatically obvious that these are links. So if, for example, you say, I've got documentation and I've got this little docs parsing badge, people won't realize that that's where my documentation is. You need to have an explicit link, like the documentation link on the previous slide, to say, this is where my documentation is. People may click on it, they may not. If they do click on it, you can usually find a location which will prove your that whichever bid is actually running is running. On the right-hand side, there is a initiative run by the Linux Foundation called the Cii Best Practices initiative. You can see the link on the right, which is basically saying, do I follow all those fairly obvious things which we're supposed to be doing in software, and is it has it got documentation? Has it got the proper coding? Are there sufficient people behind this product so that it won't fall apart in 20 minutes, and so on and so forth? It's basically a questionnaire, but it's a questionnaire of common good practice. So this is also used as the basis of the guidelines for the FIWARE Foundation contributions, saying first thing you need to do is get this badge. There's more to it for FIWARE because it's more specific, but this is Cii Best Practices are across the board. Now, if you look at the badges, you can go overboard. You can get far too many badges. You need to pick which ones are going to be of use to you. Within the DIH Squared project, there is a template project, which is the link at the bottom, which has got approximately 6-7 badges, maybe, which shows how to get hold of them. If you are deciding which area you want to go for, there's this site called shields.io, which would then give you a load of categories you can pick for these things. So obviously, if you're running, I don't know, your code coverage on, say, SonarQube, you don't also need to put a badge for your code coverage on CodeGov, for example. And if you're using GitLab, it would be different if you're using GitHub and so on and so forth. So it means you can pick up the things directly. These badges are obviously only useful if you can link them to something which potentially will fail, because anyone can put a badge of a static badge up saying doing this, and it's much better to be able to see that yes, my CI is actually passing because it's actually getting the status from my GitHub Actions, rather than I just pasted a badge which looks vaguely like the one on GitHub. What else goes on root? Okay, if you go onto a typical repository and you click on the org name, repo name, community link, you will find there are a series of optional files it will create for you to cover additional useful stuff. The more mature a product is, the more likely it will have files, not necessarily .md, but it could be .txt or blank, which cover this sort of thing. Things like a code of conduct. How do we sort out disputes between the various people who are putting into this product? Contributing. What sort of rules are there behind my my software? What do I need to put in? And there are also, this is where you have a notices file. The notices file is your way of acknowledging the open source elements which you have got, which have not already been explicitly covered by your package manager. So, for example, on one of my components, I'm borrowing the source code from Prism.js, which is a common highlighter tool, and another third-party jar. And in this particular case, I have explicitly, in my license file, pointed out that I'm using this stuff because I've only got two jars I'm using, and saying where it's actually come from. And more importantly, I am following the required notices for those two elements. So Prism.js is in MIT. You'll find there's a notices file which says this is the MIT license and these are the elements which are covered by that license. Similarly, it loads in another element from which holds this other task jar, and this is Apache 1.1, the older version of the Apache license. And again, it will have all the license in there and a list of whatever in a separate notices file. Your notices file can get very long if you have lots and lots and lots of dependencies and they are not explicitly within your package manager. However, that is your legal requirement. You are supposed to do this, therefore you need to do it. As a little warning, if you fail to do this, this is precisely the sort of thing which a legal team who is, let's try to say, buy out your company, can look at. It's quite simple to say, are you doing your due diligence on your open source software? And it would be very expensive to the price of your company if you're selling, if you have failed to do this the necessary simple task. It's a kind of software equivalent of the Van Halen tour, where they had a clause in their contract to ensure that all the brown M&Ms were removed from the bowl. It was purely in there to see if people were reading the contract, and if it wasn't, likelihood was that they were causing problems. They weren't reading the contract, weren't doing all the necessary electronics on a rather complicated rock band tour, and therefore the band got very angry and they caused all sorts of problems. Same sort of thing here. If I am trying to buy your company, I'm doing due diligence on your company, and I see that you have not been doing the necessary notices for software, then chances are you're probably not being diligent somewhere else in the company. So we would probably be looking at reducing the price I would pay to buy your company. It's difficult to do this sort of thing, isn't it? So best thing to do is to offset this to robots. There are several of these around. I know that there's one from my old company, Here Technologies. A very common one is the FOSSA bot, which is on the link on screen. This will run across all of the jars and files in your repository and find out, are there licensing issues? Are you attempting to create software using an AGPL component and you are not AGPL, for example? Now, from my experience of the FOSSA bot, I ran it across every single repository in FIWARE at the time, is that there are a certain number of false positives, but what these, I think for over the 30 projects which I was running it on, it was probably about 40 warnings were put up. Now, of those, some of them were real issues. I think one of them had no license. But some of them were false positives, which meant that someone has to manually go in, say, is this a problem, and then flick the switch as necessary. Okay, so you've got a nice little software project now, and we want to make sure that everything you are receiving from third parties is legal and above board. Contributor license agreement and developer certification of origin. This is where, again, you have a more commercial product, a product which people want to make sure that there is, it is watertight, that when I am contributing to your software, I am doing what I am allowed to do. And I've got an example of one of these. An example of one of these is, that was which one here? Proxy, wasn't it? Yeah, fine. So I've recently added in a change request into the FIWARE pet proxy, and as you can see, the proposed change, there is a template here which will say what I need to fill in order to do this, and it will say, okay, I've created a new feature, I've done something here, and I have read the contributing documentation, and I have read the CLA. If I wanted to go to the CLA, I think that's this file here. It's actually a legal document saying, yes, this is a definition of who can do what and where and why. And having done that, I'm saying I'm contributing in the rules. And there's this thing called the CLA assistant bot, which says, if I have in my text, in this or a previous comment, said, I have read the CLA document and I hereby sign the CLA, and then say, I'd ask it to recheck it, please. It will alter its comment to say yes, and it will say, yes, okay, one of my checks is correct. Now, the advantage of a CLA is that it allows for non-standard terms and conditions. You are able to create a legal document, a link to it, and say, do you agree to all this? This means that if I've got any sense, my legal document will also include the chance that I can change my terms in the future. So I don't need to go and chase up previous contributors if I wanted to change from pivot from X to Y to Z. And is also a nice, clear piece of a legal document to say certain things in a legal manner which people have actually signed up to. Now, the FIWARE Foundation have got a template harmonized CLA for contributors to use. It is not necessary, but it's useful, and it's a template. It can be modified. Now, there is a lightweight version of this, which is the developer certificate of origin, which is more along the lines of saying, yeah, I'm signing this Git commit to say I'm authorized. It holds less legal weight, and it is much more of a box ticking exercise. So if I go back to my code example, for example, if I look at the sample GitHub project, we have got here the same thing in a simpler manner. This time there is no template, so I'm just writing some text in. The code has been reviewed and properly rejected because I hadn't changed my badge. And then I say, okay, I've fixed this, and I've got an acknowledgement it's been pushed in. You can say, have I legally got the right to put this code in? We don't know, not yet. But this is just a template project. You can also have something even simpler, which would just say, yeah, looks good to me, fine, not a problem, and go forward. So that is a whistle-stop tour of some of the things you need to think about when you are discussing licensing on the internet. Here are a series of very useful licenses. You're going to have to read these yourselves. I am not a lawyer. Don't accept legal advice from me from a random stranger over the internet. There are plenty of better places to start looking and asking your legal team what to do. And therefore, I thank you very much for listening this afternoon. Please look into your open source, and if necessary, I'm open to questions. Thank you very much.